purpose is, we have a God-given purpose here, especially here in recovery, right? We are to be of maximum service to God and to our fellows, right? We are to get sober, not only to be sober, but so that we can turn around and help somebody else who's out there still suffering, right? But the goal of temptation is to destroy, leading to sin, death, and disobedience. And the purpose of inspiration is the testing of our faith to mature, strengthen, and produce perseverance. And when it comes to feelings, right, temptation appeals to self-centered desires and selfishness. Inspiration encourages selflessness, sacrifice, and growth. And also, yielding to temptation leads to guilt and separation from God. Following inspiration leads to spiritual growth, and in the case of testing, the crown of life. And some of the actions are, when facing temptation, one is advised to flee and resist. With inspiration, one is encouraged to embrace and persevere. So let me tell you a little bit about my story, right? For some of you guys have heard it, and I apologize. I see a lot of new faces, right? I'm going to share my story, and this is how it goes, right? I got sober in the mid-90s, right? I got as a result of an intervention, right? And I'm going to go kind of speed through it, right? As a result of an intervention, I had 3 little girls, and I was going down the wrong path. My family saw the route that I was taking, and they had no clue what to do, right? 2020 showed up on the TV, and my sister saw a documentary on how to do an intervention, right? With the little resources that she had, because you know what? She was my angel, right? She loved me, right? Just like Stephanie talked about a sister, I always had that sister who always watched out for me. And she saw the condition that I was in, and she didn't know what to do. She was afraid, and she saw this 2020 documentary, and God was doing for me then, way back then, what I couldn't do for myself, right? He used that documentary to put that seed in my sister to rally up the troops, because I come from a big family that's still over on the east side, right? And they all showed up one by one. They cornered me. I was maybe 95 pounds, if that, right? They cornered me in my mom's living room. They sat me down, and they did an intervention. They read letters. And, I have 3 brothers. I call them my goon squad, right? Because they're East Siders. They are East Siders, right? And I saw them cry, right? Because they did not know what to do, right? They just read this letter about how much they loved me and how much in fear they were, right? And so this is what they did for me. They offered me, they paid for a rehab. They told me I was going to move in with my sister, and she was going to help me with these children, right? And then they pointed at that door, and I like to say this because I remember that to this day. I remember that feeling, right? When they said, "We have this to offer you. And if you don't want that, there's that door." But then they grabbed my kids and they went like this, but they stay with me, right? And back then I wanted to be a mom. I knew that I was failing miserably, right? Because I would leave those little girls and say, "I'll be right back," and I wouldn't be back for days, right? Because I was out there chasing the husband that I had at the time, right? I was out there actually just chasing the high that I wanted, right? And it didn't matter, right? So I at that point, had a second of clarity, right? Because I knew that I needed help, and I was in way over my head that I took that help. And I went into this rehab that they paid for, and I went into our sister program at the time. I did some steps, and shortly after that, I found a church. And that was my story. I didn't stay in recovery, but I found a church. And in that church, it was like a program to me, because I found a fellowship. I found a relationship with God. I was in service, and I started to grow spiritually. Right? And 17 and a half years of sobriety, 17 and a half years of loving God, 17 and a half years of serving God, 17 and a half years of going to other countries to share about what God had done in my life, right? 17 and a half years of sobriety, right? After that, we hear in the rooms, you have to do this program, you have to stay connected, you have to stay plugged in, and I stopped doing everything that, that I had to do to stay, right? I stopped doing those things. I stopped going to church. I stopped connecting. I stopped calling my support group. And little by slow, right, life started to show up. I found myself, I had gotten a divorce. I quickly got hooked up with a person I had no business being with, right? And the idea was, let's go party for the weekend, right? I've been sober for 17 and a half years. I thought maybe I could. Right? I've been sober for this long. I can do it. What's a weekend, right? I can go have fun and come back, right? Well, I picked up, and you know what? What happens when we pick up, right? The allergy of the mind, the obsession, everything just, next thing you know, there I was, right? I didn't care about anything. Nothing. Those little girls had, they were already older. I cared about nothing, right? My parents, who I still have, right? Over on the east side, my dad's 100, about to be 101, right? I still have these parents, and they were suffering because they were seeing me, picking up and going back into a lifestyle that they thought that I had left, right? So there I was using, and for 6.5 years, I could not find recovery, not one single day, not one single moment, because you know what? I used day and night. Who slept, right? I didn't. Who worked? I didn't, right? Because all I wanted to do was get loaded. And next thing you know, if I'm not working, if I'm not doing these things, right, how am I going to support my habit? Well, at the age of 40, I had never been to jail. I found myself doing things that I had to do, right, to enable me to continue to get loaded. And so now I found myself going to jail. I found myself picking up cases, being on probation. I found myself living this lifestyle that I had no business being in. Because don't you know, right, I had a God, and I walked away from this God. But I can tell you, through this dark period of my life, that God never let me go. And he would speak to me through his word that I had already, that I knew about, but I was stuck in that disease that had me in a chokehold, and I couldn't step away, right? My heart was so hard, that those words couldn't penetrate. The way God was trying to reach me, it couldn't penetrate, right? And I can tell you 6.5 years of misery, 6.5 years of misery, right? To talk about temptation and inspiration, right? In that period of time, there is no way in heck that I could even see any kind of temptation, because I was way deep down in it, right? And I couldn't see any kind of inspiration because my heart was so hardened that it couldn't penetrate anything, right? So there was no inspiration for me. So that's what I call misery. That's what I call the darkness. That's what I call, agony, because that's what it felt like for me, because I was disconnected from a higher power that I knew, right? And so I went on 6.5 years, right? And then what happened? God did for me what I could not do for myself, right? A series of events happened. There was a series of events happened, but the one in particular that I know is that when my youngest, because I have 3 daughters, the youngest one was going to have a baby, and she sent me a text, because she couldn't even come and see me face to face, because they didn't want nothing to do with me, right? She sent me a text, and she said, Mom, I'm telling you right now, I'm pregnant. I know what drugs does to a child. I don't want that to be part of my child's life. I want you to be part of the baby's life. But if you're going to be living this life, you can just stop calling me, right? And just like they did that intervention way back when they did this with the kids, right? I felt like I wanted to be part of this child's life, right? And AA says don't do anything, don't do this for anybody. But you know what? Sometimes, and a lot of times, right? A lot of times there are certain things that happen in our life where it pushes us into a direction where God wants us to be, right? And that's exactly what God did, right? He used that text, and I don't even think she knows, right, that text was such a big integral part of my recovery, right? Because it was a moment where I had to take a look at myself, where I had come, how far from God I had come, right? And so what happened was I had heard of Mariposa, and I called Gateway, and they told me to call every 2 hours, and I was calling every 2 hours, and every 2 hours for about almost a week, I called, right? But every 2 hours I was calling because my alarm said so, but I was getting loaded the whole time. And finally, after a week, they told me, okay, we have a bed for you. We have a detox bed. And I remember grabbing my belongings in a hefty bag, right? And calling up that toxic boyfriend who was at this point barely there, right? And I need a ride. And he drove me all the way up that hill, right? If you know where Mariposa's at, it's up on the hill. And we drove up there getting loaded the whole time. And I remember the door opening, and I remember I could see the door, and I can see the light, because it was nighttime, right? And I can see the light, and I remember he asked me, he's all, "Are you sure? Are you sure you want to go in, right?" And I at that point was still questioning, do I really want to do this? Will I be able to get sober? Will I be able to do this, right? Am I going to want to leave? You know, and then something in my head, and I know that it was God speaking to me, said, you know what? Don't listen. Just walk in, grab your stuff, and don't look back. And I walked in, and the minute I walked in, God showed up. Right? God showed up, and he has been with me every step of the way. I can tell you how my life has changed, right? Because I took that step of faith, right? I took that step of faith, and the minute I did, there he was, right? Because don't you know, like a week before, or maybe like 2 weeks before, I had cried out to God, and I was done, and I said, God, please help me. And it wasn't even the words that came out of my mouth. It was through the groans and through the petitions of my heart. He heard that, right? And he came and he stepped in, and he met me at those gates, and he met me through the 10 and a half, 11 days of detox. And then I went into residential. And then from there, I went into an SLE. So my journey was a series of one day at a time. Let's do what was suggested, right? Because I was willing to be willing to be willing, right? Because they said, are you willing to go to any lengths for your sobriety? And I said yes, right? Because I know that if I didn't, I was going to die, right? You know, the book says that we get to a point where we have to make a choice, right? Are we going to go to the bitter end, or are we going to accept the spiritual help, right? And I did. I accepted the spiritual help, and God has shown up through the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. This is a plug for this new step study, right? If you haven't done the steps, if you have done the steps, if you want to be in service, I just ask that you show up April 10th, you know, at 6:30, and be willing to be willing to be willing, right? And God is going to work, right? Because the moment I'm willing, God always steps in and does the rest. Just like today, right? They asked me to chair, they asked me to bring this message, and I said, I'm willing. Right? Why am I willing, right? Because God has shown up in so many ways, right? He's given me recovery. He's given me a new life. He's given me the ability to show up as the woman he has always intended me to be, right? What I can say about the steps, right? So like I said, I came to a point where, you know, I had taken the reins of my life, you know, and that was the greatest temptation that I had faced, right? And I didn't know it then, but I know it now. The temptation was this, right? The idea that I can do this on my own, right? That was the temptation. That's that I failed miserably, right? Because I picked up the reins of my life, because the reality is that self-reliance fails me every single time. But at that time, I thought that I could. That, you know what, God, you know, all this stuff is happening. Where are you, right? I'm doubting God, right? Those are the temptations. But instead of clinging to what God has already told me, right, I decided to take those reins of my life. And that's where, you know, I had to prove to myself that self-reliance fails. And today, I stand here with 6.5 years of sobriety, right? And I'll tell you that every single day, God has shown up for me, right? Every single day, God has shown. There has not been one day when I feel like I can't, right? But because I know that I can. I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength, right? God tells me that. You know, like Stephanie said, in the world, right? In this world, in my world, there's difficulties. And we're always going to face difficulties, right? The reason that I actually went out way back before this relapse was because I lost somebody that was close to me, right? It was the grief that swallowed me up. I wanted to change the way I felt, and I couldn't do it fast enough, right? Today, because of this program, because of these steps, I don't need to run. I get to face whatever life has for me, and I get to recover, right? Because I have steps, I have tools, I have a fellowship, that I can reach out to, that I can share drop my truth with, that I can say, hey, I'm scared. Hey, I don't know. Hey, I have a doubt. Or, hey, you know what? Can you please encourage me? Can you please pray for me? Right? This program is amazing. I want to just tell you again, if you want to do the steps, the biblical way, Steps by the Big Book, come April 10th, right? Keep coming back, right? We have a saying here at Recovery Church, right? For those of you who are new, we have a saying here at Recovery Church, give us a year and your life is going to change. Give us 1 year to be here, right? We offer you guys good coffee, good snacks, and good fellowship, right? Somebody get excited. But, as far as temptation and inspiration, right? Back in those days, right, when I was in active addiction, there is no way that I could have had any type of inspiration. But what the steps provided for me was this, right? And I'm going to walk you really quick through the steps and how they worked in my life, right? Early on, I heard in the first 3 steps, I can't, he can, I think I'll let him. Right? That's the first 3 steps in a nutshell for me, right? That's all I needed, right? To hear that I can't. I had already, proven to myself that I couldn't, right? 6.5 years, when we have time, maybe you catch me after, I'll let you know how ugly it got, right? Because it got ugly. And so I got here, I can't, I can't. But then after they started talking, I can see God in all the steps, right? And I knew a God and quickly connected with this higher power that I thought that I had walked away from, but he never walked away from me, right? And so he can, and it's the think I'll let him. It's like, and the everyday thing, it's the everyday turning over of my will to God's will. Is it easy? No. Is it hard? No. Because you know what? I have a history, a track record that, Lily, when you take the reins of your life, you already know where it ends up, right? And thank God I have that story, right? Because it makes it easier for me to just turn things over to God. The step 4, they said to be scared of it, right? Everybody, how scary, right? But the reality, once I did 1, 2, and 3, I was ready to do that 4, right? Because I wanted to make a fearless and searching inventory. What were the wrongs, right? I knew I was a good person. I just knew that I did things and come to learn was because of the fears that I had. I was riddled with 100 forms of fear, right? And that I found out in the fifth step as I shared with my sponsor, and she was able to see and to point out the faults in my makeup, right? Where I was trying to do things because of a fear that I had, right? So 6 and 7, I get to see my character defects. Hey, they're always going to be there. But the more I turn them over to God and allow him to just work in me, it's called sanctification. You know what? It's a process. It's not instantaneous. It's gonna happen. You know what I mean? I just do the next right thing, right? Making a list. I remember my sponsor, that 8 step, make a list. You know what? You make 3 categories: the ones that you're going to do, the ones that maybe, and the ones that hell no, you'll never make that amends, right? And I can tell you that now, as a result of doing the steps over and over and over, there is not one person that I will not make an amends to, right? That was on that initial list, right? Some I haven't made the amends to because I can't find them, right? But you know what? I know that if I ever have them in front of me, that amends is going to happen, right? Because it's the freedom that we get here, right? We get to clean our side of the street. We don't get to talk about anything else but what the harms that I did, right? And you know what? 10 and 11 and 12, they call them the maintenance steps, right? But the reality, they're the growth steps, right? And the 10th step, I get to continue to take an inventory of my life, and when I'm wrong, properly admit it. The step 11 is a connection with my God, and step 12 is to try to carry this message to the alcoholic who still suffers. You know, like Stephanie said, right? I don't keep my sobriety and my recovery hidden. Never, right? I speak about it wherever I go. Right, I have people that come here from the place where I work, right? I get to share the hope that I have had and that I have found here in AA. I have found and been reconnected with the higher power. So now when it comes to, you know, as a result of doing these steps, as a result of being this new person, a new creation, I get to now, you know, have this spirit that lives within me that is in tune with the inspiration that God sends me, right? It's the small, still voice, right? That small, still voice, I always had it. It was always there. It was just clouded by the world. But now that I have done these steps and these things have been cleared away, I have this direct access with the higher power who gives me the inspiration that allows me to walk in this inspiration and share this inspiration with others. And I hope tonight that I've shared a little bit of inspiration with you guys. And if anything that I can tell you is that God loves you. God has a plan and a purpose for your life. All you have to do is be willing, open your heart, let him in, and watch him work. Thank you, Lily Alcoholic.
Hello, Recovery Church. I'm Diana. I'm an alcoholic and child of God, and tonight is birthday night. So if you're celebrating a birthday this month, when I call your date up, or your month up, excuse me, come up and get a cross and a hug. "30 days. Anyone have 30 days? 60 days. Anyone have 60 days?